Now that's a start, and we are only getting started, guys. We're moving forward, and our next speaker is somebody who Anjali mentioned in her talk. It's Mark Schenk, Managing Director of Anecdote International. And I believe Mark is on par with Anjali in terms of something that can harm the role of a Chief Story Officer. Mark will share why the Chief Story Officer role will fail if you're not careful enough. So Mark, I just made you the host. Please join us on air, and I'll be happy to move off the air for you.
Okay, can you hear me, Artem?
Yes, loud and clear, and I can see you too.
All right,
Thank
fantastic.
you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for joining us in this morning. And I'm off the air. It's all yours, guys. Let's have our fires for Mark, and let me know when you need the slides. I'm here for you.
Okay, thank you, Artem. All right. So, hello, everybody. I'm coming to you live from a remote town called Whakatane in New Zealand. So, I've got a very interesting number of days here. I gave a presentation to a group of CEOs this morning. Tonight, I've travelled to Whakatane to run an event tomorrow. Tomorrow night, I'm on a panel in Artem's conference, and then Friday morning, another group of CEOs. So I feel like my head is spinning at the moment. But we're going to talk about something that is close to my heart, and that is the role of, we'll talk about the Chief Storytelling Officer role. And I would just like to say, I totally believe in the power of storytelling. Sean Callahan, myself, started Anecdote in 2004. I've worked with organizations all over the world. I've trained many of the speakers in this conference, including Anjali, our previous speaker. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I have some strong views, but I want you to have clearly in your mind that as I present these views, I have seen the power of storytelling. I've seen it transform leaders. I've seen it transform strategies from dry documents into really coherent human narratives that the organization can embrace. I've coached executives to fire people, to communicate ideas. The power of storytelling is amazing. So I totally believe in it. It's a superpower if you can harness it. But I don't believe organizations should have chief storytelling officers, and I'm going to articulate my reasons for that. But as I go through my reasons, please bear in mind that I'm total supporter of storytelling, but I'm not a supporter of the role of chief storytelling officer. So Artem, if you could share the slides, please. Okay, yep, that's all very good. Next one. All right, so here's my belief. Communication in organizations is broken. We don't even realize it because we don't look at the facts, and the facts are compelling. So firstly, I'll start with the things that we know from experience. The first thing we notice about organizational communication is that most presentations are boring, and death by PowerPoint is the rule, not the exception. The data shows us that between 80 and 95% of people in organizations don't understand the organization's strategy. Most change initiatives fail not because of the technology, because of the people part of it. They're not engaged by it, they don't understand it. They essentially don't know what to do with the change. Most of our communications in business are abstract. We say things like, oh, we can strategically reorient the organization to take advantage of emerging market opportunities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thinking that we're communicating, but we're not. Like, the list goes on and on. But if you stop and look at the data, communication organizations is fundamentally broken. And one of the simple fixes is more story. And the reason that it's broken is that we default to a communication method that isn't very effective for humans. We use statements, assertions, opinions. We tell, we push. Story is a completely different thing. It's about using events, moments, and we call it a pull strategy, because when you tell a story, people can picture it in their mind, they can imagine it happening, and they're pulling the story towards them. It's also showing rather than telling. So story is an incredibly effective antidote to the problem of organizational communication, but not many organizations do it. And Anjali covered some of the reasons that organizations don't do it. I'll go into it a little bit more. Next slide, please. Now, this is a bit of audience participation here. This activity is called a pre-mortem. And I want you to imagine that your organization appoints a chief storytelling officer, and we're now projecting ourselves 1 year into the future. So the chief storytelling officer has been in role for a year, and it's a total failure. There are turf wars with marketing and comms. The business units aren't interested because it's all fluffy bunny stuff that's totally foreign to them. The CEO is under pressure to pull the plug and remove the chief storytelling officer. So I want you to imagine that it's June 2027, 1 year from now, and this is the scenario. Please find the chat window and just type some thoughts in there. What might have caused this outcome? So I'm just really interested to see what your thoughts are on why the chief storytelling officer may have failed. So I'll just give you a minute or two to pop thoughts into the chat window. Okay, so we've got some ideas. So 1 year isn't enough. No one measured the effects. Tried to do it top down, cascader top down. The idea, oh yes, Michelle, the idea was actually successful, but existing positions and roles felt threatened by it. Oksana, very difficult to have KPIs on storytelling. 100%, very, very difficult. So we got no quick results. You can have very quick results with the CSO, but they're hard to measure. Yes, the CSO was the only one telling stories instead of enabling the organization. All right. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why the CEO role might fail. Please, as you think of more, please feel free to put them into the chat window. So yeah, Alexis, it looks like it was additional work. So these are all excellent ideas, and I'll be very keen to look at these later and go through them in detail. So I'm going to give you my views on why that might have failed. So thank you to all the people that have put entries into the chat window. Please continue to do so if you come up with another idea. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so here's my thought on why the CSO role, one of the main reasons that the CSO might fail. And that's because the wrong person gets the job. And so there's 3 categories of wrong person. I'm going to run through each of them and just give you my thoughts on why these, what are the characteristics of these different people and why they might go wrong. So next slide, please, Artem. All right, so the theorist. You've probably all seen or heard the theorist. So the theorist is somebody who is really excited about the neuroscience of storytelling. They can recite Joseph Campbell. They can articulate clearly Booker and his 7 stories. They can recite the 17 steps of the hero's journey. They write beautifully. So the theorist is somebody that you may well have come across. I've seen lots of these in the storytelling world. People who've read a few books and they go, yes, I know a lot about story, and they sound good in a lecture theatre. So next slide, please, Artem. They sound good on a lecture theatre, but they are not very effective in a boardroom. So the deepest irony of the theorist, right? Somebody who gets appointed to a CSO role and they're a theorist. They know all about storytelling, but the deep irony is they study it, but they don't use it very effectively. Now, I just invite you to read any of the published papers by McKinsey, etc., McKinsey, Accenture, KPMG, etc., on the topic of storytelling, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Lots of theories. Storytelling does this and storytelling does that and activates oxytocin and adrenaline, etc. But it doesn't actually help the organization get anything done. Next slide, please, Artem. And this person's going to get eaten alive in the boardroom. All right, so the performer, that's the second person that should not be in a storyteller role. But we're very tempted to hire this sort of person because they are amazing storytellers. They can perform, basically. They're great at it. They've got generally a background in theatre or the arts. And again, I've seen this many times. I was at a conference in Denver in 2016, and I saw a well-known business storytelling expert stand on stage in front of a bunch of business people and say, when you're telling a story, don't say you're sad, be sad. Like, I'm serious. That happened. This person was, they were a theatre performer. They were a brilliant storyteller, brilliant storyteller. But they were approaching it from a theatrical, an artistic, if I might say, a Hollywood background. Right, so in an interview, they would seem terrific as your chief storytelling officer. But in reality, you put them in an organization and it'd be a train wreck. My strongest advice, next slide, please. If you see somebody like the performer in your organization, someone who says, you should not say you're sad, you should be sad, then call security and get them escorted from the building. Okay, Artem, thank you for that. I can do the slides myself. All right, so the performer, you definitely don't want the performer being a chief storytelling officer. So hiring this person would be a big mistake. The next one is the innocent, right? This is somebody who is deeply passionate about storytelling. They understand storytelling from a business perspective. They are approachable, they are empathetic, they are great coaches, but they've never sat in a boardroom, they've never held a P&L, they've never been part of a strategy session or been accountable for a business outcome. So they're wonderful storytellers, deeply caring about the organization and able to help if allowed to. But what I'll come to next is that this person's going to get eaten alive because the business won't see it as business-like. It'll be a fluffy bunny, oh, that's storytelling. So this is the third category of person that we could well hire as a chief storytelling officer that would be a disaster. Right? So my main concern about hiring chief storytelling officers is, who do you get to do it? I'll come to later into the type of characteristics that we need in a chief storytelling officer. But many of the people who are on the stage presenting at conferences, etc., would be terrible choices for a chief storytelling officer because they fall into one of those three categories. So that's my main concern, is that we hire the wrong people. So, as I say, I totally believe in the power of storytelling, but I have great deep concerns about the chief storytelling officer role. So one of the reasons that I think if in a year's time there was a backlash against the chief storytelling officer, there was conflict with other units, is because we've hired the wrong person. So bottom line, hiring the right person would be a really big challenge. All right, so now with the performer and the theorist, they'll use the word liberally, the word story liberally. Just this morning, they'll use the word story liberally, and that is a mistake. Just this morning, I had a bunch of senior executives in a room, and I asked them to picture themselves at their desk. They're busy. They've got a bunch of tasks from the CEO. They've got people waiting to see them, a lot of unread emails in their inbox, some of them urgent, projects that are overdue. And so you're busy, and someone comes up to you that you don't know particularly well and says, I want to tell you a story. What goes through your mind in that moment? So I just invite you to put yourself in that scenario. You're at desk, you're busy, and someone comes up to you and says, I want to tell you a story. What goes through your mind in that moment? So feel free to find the chat window. And okay, Artem, exactly. First thought, run. As you're typing into the chat window, I'll tell you the things that people said in response to that prompt this morning. The first one, I don't have time for this. The second one, what's this got to do with business? The third one, who are you? Why are you wasting my time? The fourth one, oh, this must be made up. Now, a couple of people said, I might be interested, but it'd need to be a really good story. So yeah, thanks, Oksana. Leave me alone, get lost. So one of the things about the use of story in business is it's got to be, you've got to avoid using the S word. Don't say storytelling. And yet the three roles that I mentioned, the theorist, the performer, and the innocent, their tendency is, I love story, I'm going to talk about story. Well, if you've been in the storytelling game as long as I have, you know that story is a powerful tool, but you don't use the word story when you're communicating with business people. Right? Because they have those reactions. Don't have time, I'm too busy, what's this got to do with work? This must be made up. So don't use the S word when you're in organizations. And so one of the roles of the chief storytelling officer will already be undermined because it's got storytelling in the title. And business people will look at the word storytelling and go, that's not business-like. I don't have time for any of that stuff. How is this going to help me do my business? So just the title chief storytelling officer puts the person in the role, no matter how good they are, at a disadvantage. All right. Now, the other thing that's going to happen with the chief storytelling officer is that I think of organizational culture as being like the immune system in our bodies. When something foreign enters our bodies, our immune system attacks it. And there's three ways this plays out in an four ways it plays out in an organization that the chief storytelling officer will be subjected to. Right? Because when something seems foreign, the organization's culture will kick into gear. It'll kick into action and try to do something about it. Just like our immune system tries to protect ourselves. Right? First thing that our body might do is to isolate. Right? So whatever the antibody is, our immune system goes, we're going to do something about that. And so the problem is that the chief storytelling officer could become isolated, right? It gets attacked and neutralized, and with isolation, the CSO position essentially gets isolated, gets positioned apart, gets ignored and starved of oxygen. The next one is the antibodies, where the body's antibodies essentially attack the chief storytelling officer. So the resistance inside the organization becomes opposition. You get excluded from the decision. The value of the role is frequently questioned, and the CSO is likely to spend most of the time justifying their existence rather than doing their job. Now, I had 20 years in the Australian Air Force, and my last role was head of the Air Force's internal management consulting agency. Now, I took over, I was the second commander of that unit, and I took over from a guy who'd been running the unit for 8 years. And as he was explaining to me how the unit operated, he said, one of the things I try to do here, Mark, is be collaborative. And so everybody calls each other by their first name, regardless of rank. Now, any of you who've seen any movies or been in the military knows that there's a rank system and you call superior officers sir or ma'am. Well, I was with one of my sergeants, and I was talking to a senior officer, an officer who was more senior to me, and so I'm calling him sir. So I was a wing commander, so a colonel, and I was talking to a brigadier. And so chatting away, and the sergeant piped up and said, Mark, I just want to interrupt you there. And in an organization that is has a strong hierarchy, what that sergeant did was it was shocking. And I immediately pulled the sergeant aside and said, don't do that. I went back to the office and explained and said to everybody, new rule, we follow the rules. We're the same as the rest of the Air Force, and we call, if I'm, you call me sir, and corporals call the sergeant sergeant. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because one of the things that happened during the 8 years of that organization's existence was that they had spent almost the entire time justifying their existence because they behaved in ways that were really foreign to the Air Force. The Air Force's immune system kicked in, and it made it very hard for that organization to get anything done. So this is an example of how the organization's antibodies will kick in because it sees the chief storytelling officer as different. The other risk of chief storytelling officer is that it gradually gets absorbed into the organization's system. So over a series of reorganizations, very minor at the start, but there's minor restructures, and the role reporting system gets changed, and it suddenly becomes content creation or part of the marketing function. And so its transformational potential is neutralized. So this assimilation problem is where the organization just makes the chief storytelling officer role look like the rest of the roles in the organization. And this last one, abdication, somebody's already picked up on this. The role is successful. And everybody goes, oh yes, storytelling, that's somebody else's job. Go and talk to the chief storytelling officer. They do storytelling. So essentially what happens is that the organization doesn't change. They just leave all the storytelling to the chief storytelling officer, which as far as I'm concerned it's not the point, right? To fix the problem of organizational communication is broken. Organizations need to change. And it's not just the chief storytelling officer who needs to do that change. So anyway, the organization's immune system it's a problem. It's going to be a big problem for a CSO. I know I'm sounding very negative here, but I just want to be real about this because I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And all these things, they're real, and we ignore them at our peril. So I just want to highlight them. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is there's a risk of being an insider, right? If the chief storytelling officer is an insider, they've absorbed the assumptions embedded in that organization about how professional communication takes place. And so over time, they get shaped by the very immune system that they're there to try and challenge. And the CSO gets too much like the organization to notice all of those things that they should be noticing around the water cooler. In essence, the chief story officer may well have to adapt in order to survive, and that will reduce the effectiveness of their role because they'll just be like everybody else. There is an advantage to having an external person come in and help you. Right? External people, experienced, quality people, they've worked across many organizations. They've earned their stripes across many different organizations, many different contexts, and they've got credibility that is often denied to insiders. Because the outsider comes in without being immersed in the organization's culture, they can see things that somebody within an organization can't see. They're not shaped by the assumptions that they're there to challenge. So there is an advantage to being an outsider. Now, what does a good CSO look like? Well, I guess the first thing is that a CSO is going to hold an executive role in an organization, and they need to be familiar with how organizations work. Right? They need to understand organizational politics. They need to navigate the system. They need to, and Anjali said this very articulately, the CEO has to champion the CSO role. The CEO has to create space for it. But the CSO obviously is not the one in charge, right? The CSO is in a supporting role, and picking up on the theme of the conference, more of a navigator than the captain of the ship. In fact, definitely not the captain of the ship. So as navigator, they're not invisible, but the CSO is not center stage, right? As Anjali said, the CSO can't be the one telling the stories. The CSO needs to be helping the organization in many different ways to change the way they communicate. And one of the ways is to coach executives to be more effective communicators. So the navigator doesn't grab the wheel. They never override the captain in front of the crew, but their job is to know where the ship is going, right? They have to know where the ship is going and make sure the people in charge have what they need to help the organization get there. And to do this, the CSO has a number of instruments at their disposal. Right? So you're not the CSO, not as the storyteller. The role is to help the organization use stories to shape behavior, guide decisions, and most importantly, get stuff done. All right? So the CSO will only be successful if they help the organization be better, deliver better results, have fewer conflicts, greater strategic alignment, greater clarity about strategy. Right? So those things are all possible, but you need to be pretty experienced, both in storytelling and business, to be able to fulfill that role. So the instruments that the CSO has. Well, the first and obvious one is storytelling, right? Helping people communicate their messages in ways that are more engaging, more memorable, more influential, and which have more impact. Right? So shaping key messages. Anjali gave the example of Satya Nadella's opening email to his staff. Right? Great example of how the CSO role can help senior executives, in fact, the whole organization, be better at communicating, and once again, more memorable, more engaging, clearer, and having more impact. But storytelling is only one of the tools. The next one is story listening. Now, I've covered this in previous conferences that Artem has run. Story listening is about being able to listen to the organization and find stories that help give insights into what's really going on. What are the things that are shaping our culture? I like to think of an organizational culture as being, I think stories, in fact, I'll step back. If you imagine a TV screen, right? You've probably all got big screens in your homes. Those screens are made up of millions of pixels, right, that create a picture. I like to think of an organization's culture where the pixels are the stories that are being told in the organization. So stories are the pixels of your organization's culture. And part of the job of the Chief Storytelling Officer is to be able to find those pixels, listen to them, use them to illustrate key points, understand the patterns of behavior in an organization, and create new stories that create new patterns that help shape an organization's culture. Right? So if you're not really au fait with the concept of story listening and how to do this in an organization, then you shouldn't be a Chief Storytelling Officer. The third one is story triggering. Well, this is pretty simple. When leaders do things, people pay attention. And so you can help leaders be more effective by helping them change their behavior and doing little things that people talk about. I'll give you an example. This will be 15 years ago, I was doing a big project for a bunch of government departments around building communities of practice around sustainability. And so these government organisations, there was 10 of them all around Australia, and they had groups of people who were working mostly out of their own passion to help the organisation be more sustainable. Now, they had very little funding, and I was at this particular organisation, and I walked into the CEO's office one morning and I said, this afternoon at 2:00, your community of practice is meeting around sustainability. It would be great if at some stage during that 1 hour meeting, you could just walk past the room, open the door, stick your head in and say, you guys are doing a great job. That's all I want you to do. Anyway, the CEO did that, closed the door. Well, for the next 15 minutes, that entire room was buzzing. Oh my goodness, did you see that? Anyway, tiny little things that trigger stories in an organization can make a big difference. So again, the CSO role has a key, opportunity to use this story triggering to help create stories that travel in an organization, the things you want to see more of. And of course, the final one is coaching, right? Coaching individuals. Story coaching takes many forms. Somebody might be giving feedback in a one-on-one session. They might be letting somebody go. In fact, I was coaching a CEO over the last couple of weeks who is having to make a person redundant. They've been with the organization a long time, and they're really liked by a lot of the people in the organization. Anyway, I coached them on how to have the conversation with them, again, using stories, right? Being able to communicate effectively using a simple story structure. We call it the clarity story. You coach Satya Nadella to give his opening address. It's particularly useful when you're helping senior executives introduce themselves to their teams or whatever. Anyway, the coaching side of it. So in addition to all the other skills, the chief storytelling officer needs to be a good coach. So you can see the list of instruments gives you an idea of the skill set that the chief storytelling officer will need, and not many people have it. So you can have somebody who has got all of these things and they have business experience where they're able to navigate the politics of an organization, but it's rare. So again, I'm just trying to be pragmatic here, because my view is that the CSO role can be incredibly valuable for an organization, but the ability to achieve that value is going to be very hard to come by. And it's not about having a big story, right? Helping the organization with the big stories, that is a part of the role, but it's not the main role. The main role is the little stories, helping people have the corridor conversations, helping the salesperson have a better conversation with their customer, helping a leader have some impact and get people motivated at the Monday morning stand-up. or the Friday afternoon stand-up at the end of the week. So it's not just about the big stories, it's about the little stories as well. Now, at the start of this presentation, I said, I believe storytelling is incredibly powerful. It is absolutely incredibly powerful. Organizations need it desperately, but it's too important for us to get it wrong. And my worry is that the rush towards appointing chief storytelling officers could actually work against us in the long term. If we do have a chief storytelling officer, it's got to be done very, very mindfully. You need to be very careful about the person that you select. And you need to make sure that all of those instruments are being used, right? Storytelling, story listening, story triggering, and story coaching. So it's too important to get wrong. And that's why I'm passionate about it. I would hate to see us set storytelling back in the eyes of the business world at the very moment when business needs it the most. So for that reason, I think the Chief Storytelling Officer is a lovely concept, very difficult to implement in practice. I don't want to appear too negative, but I do want the storytelling world to understand the practical implications of a Chief Storytelling Officer. And with that, how am I going for time, Artem?
We still have 3 minutes for a short Q&A, and you're doing great. And we actually have a question from Tatiana. But first, let me thank you for this pragmatic approach and for specifying that storytelling is too important to get it wrong. This is fabulous. Love it. We have a question from Tatiana. She's asking, what does teaching storytelling mean to you? And I would add to that, what simple steps can be taken towards teaching story in the corporate setting?
Okay, so the first thing is that most of our corporate communication is statements and assertions. As I mentioned earlier, let's reposition the organization to take advantage of emerging market opportunities. And we talk in a way that we think sounds very intellectual, and we are taught to do it, right? So most of us do it. So don't feel bad that you do it because it's been beaten into you. So the first thing is to help people understand that that method of communication doesn't work, and that instead they should simply give an example. Right? So you don't say, tell a story, you just say, have you got an example of a time when you saw that happen? All right. That's the first thing. Just help people understand the limitations of the thing that they're conditioned to do.
Lovely. A short and yet a very important step. Exactly. We actually have some time for one more question from participants. Alexandra is asking, if we don't say, I'm going to tell a story, how should we say it so that people do not say, I don't have time for this?
Yeah, okay. There's 100 ways, but the first way is, could I just give you an example of something I saw last week? So that's one. Another one might be, look, I learned an important lesson about letting somebody go when I was back in XYZ. Or, look, I saw something when I was working for IBM that was da-da-da. Right? So you tell a story, you simply don't prefix it with the fact that it is a story. You're simply relating an event that happened. And so instead of saying, I want to tell you a story, we talk about it as being, you have a relevance statement. Right? Something like, I saw an example of just how important it is to take people on a journey with you when I was working with a global company last week. Then you tell the story. And then you finish with your point. So there's many, many ways you can tell a story and tap into all of the power of storytelling without undermining your position by saying, I want to tell you a story. So I will say, it's easy to say, it's hard to do, right? Because the word story is so deep in the zeitgeist. But please do not confuse the fact that story is in the zeitgeist with its acceptances by business people, right? When you say the word story to a business person, they think, I don't have time for this. What's this got to do with work? This is probably made up. What the heck do you want? Right? That is what they think. I've been doing this for over 20 years. That's what goes through their head. So you can do it in many different ways without ever using the word story.
Great advice. Thank you so much. It's really been such a practical talk, and I would love you to stay if you can and answer a couple of questions in the chat. But before I let you go, a traditional question. So story can be applied in many ways you've saw over the course of your career. And let's imagine you have only one way to apply story to culture, to change, to strategy. What one way would you choose and why?
Oh, that is such a difficult question. I'll go back to the thing I said a little while ago. Even though there's so many other things I would like to say, the one thing is to help people understand that the difference between statements and stories. So just that one thing, helping people understand that story is a valid and effective business communication choice, and that choice is available to them. And hopefully,
so using story to prove that story is valid.
Yeah.
If I understand you correctly. Lovely. What a great choice. Thank you so much, Mark. It was amazing as usual. Thank you for joining us in your non-stop journey, and I wish you strength, resilience, and everything along your journey. Let's hear our fires for Mark, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And I want to echo what Anjali said. What you do is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. This is coming from you means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Please feel free to stay in the chat and reply to some of the comments. And we'll be moving forward because our next